Howdy. Welcome to the Texas A&M University College of Veterinary Medicine and Biomedical Sciences Peer Programs STEM Education Series. Today, third-year veterinary student Chelsea Gartman will present Animal Heroes. This Veterans Day, we will honor those men and women who selflessly give to this country and its citizens through their military service. Often seen working alongside them are military animals. Chelsea will identify the many species of animals who have served in the armed forces, as well as describe the innate and learned behaviors which aid in their training and the human-animal bond which makes this all possible. Welcome, Chelsea.
Hi, my name is Chelsea, like Tori said, and we're going to go ahead and get started with military veterinarians and the animal soldiers that work alongside them. So you may not know that there are veterinarians in the military, and I'm going to go through some of the things that they do for our country. So for some people, like the people who go into the military, it's a big honor to serve our country, and that's a big motivation for a lot of veterinarians who choose to go into that field. It's also a very unique experience. There are a lot of things overseas that veterinarians can experience that they wouldn't get to experience if they worked, say, in a clinic where they saw cats and dogs and kind of did the 9-to-5 thing. It's also very rewarding. So there are some things that they can do that can help them out also. So there's a deal that's set up with the Army if you do join the Veterinary Corps, where they pay for your vet school if you go into the military after your vet school. So you spend 4 years in the military, and that helps pay for your 4 years of vet school. And then also it's a huge learning opportunity. So if you go to vet school, you learn about cats, dogs, horses, cows, sheep, some of the food animals, and your live or your small animals like cats and dogs, and a little bit of things like guinea pigs and birds and stuff. If you're going to these other countries, you might see some animals that you aren't going to see necessarily here in the United States a lot, and you can work with people on how to take care of them and things like that. And mostly the Army is going to have the Veterinary Corps that they have veterinarians employed in. So if you're wondering kind of what a veterinarian would do overseas, we're going to go through that. So one of the big things that they do is to take care of the animals that belong to the government. So we'll go into things like military dogs later. Well, of course, they're going to have medical needs. So these veterinarians take care of those animals to make sure that their medical needs are met and that they stay nice and healthy. They also treat the animals that belong to military men and women. So there are military bases all over the United States where military men and women and their families live, and they have their pets that need to be taken care of. So military veterinarians take care of those pets, and that includes cats and dogs and whatever pets they may have as well. They can also do research. So there are some diseases in the military that the military sees overseas that we don't see here because we're very fortunate to live in a country where we just don't have those diseases, either in the human population or in our livestock, like our cows. They also train other people. So if there's a soldier that's in charge of a dog, and they're out on patrol, they want to make sure that the soldier knows when to look for maybe the dog's getting overheated because he's in Afghanistan and it's 110 degrees outside, those sorts of things. They can also do other command activities, which we won't really go into, and then public health. So this is something that a lot of people may not really be aware of, but veterinarians are actually huge players in the public health role. So you may or may not know that some of those big tanks and things that spend time over in places like Iraq and Afghanistan actually come back to the United States and they have to be cleaned. So some of the animal diseases that they have over there that we don't have here can actually live in the sand and some of the organic stuff that comes back with the military vehicles. And one job that a veterinarian can do in public health is to actually inspect the vehicles and tell people how they should clean it to make sure that those diseases don't come into our country. And the Veterinary Corps is a branch of the Army where veterinarians are employed. And then also vet students. So vet students have a unique opportunity to work with military veterinarians as well. So I went to the Army's website and I found helpful skills for military veterinarians. So making accurate, immediate decisions. So if you're in battle, you can probably imagine that there's a lot going on. There might be firefight, there might be smoke everywhere, sand, what have you. So there's a lot kind of going on around you, and if you can't really make a decision because you're too nervous or whatever, then it's not going to be maybe the best job for you. And it's also very mentally and physically challenging. So your brain's working really hard to try to think through all the stuff that you learned in school while you might be really warm, or you might be running around trying to get to cover and then taking care of the animals, etc. And then you have to apply the things that you learn and be able to solve problems that might be going on for your veterinary patient while you're in the midst of all this. And concentration, of course, goes into that. Sometimes it's hard to concentrate in normal life, so you have to be able to concentrate under all the stress going on around you. So some of the things that they do to prepare veterinarians to go into military service is they actually have a training program that's called the Army Medical Department Officer Training. So once you go through that, you have to meet height and weight requirements, and you have to be physically fit. So I know that a lot of times today we hear about making sure you get so many minutes a day of exercise and making sure that you eat healthy and things like that. Well, that's really important when you're running around trying to get out of the way of fire or go take care of an animal, or sometimes even physically move an animal to safety. And so how many of you think you might be fit enough for the military? So we went through military veterinarians, but like Tori said, people are not our only soldiers. So I want to give you all just a few minutes and see if we can get some ideas of what kind of animals you think are in the military. And there's more than one, there's more than two. We'll go through two in detail, and then we'll run through some others that have been kind of past and present players in the military. So you probably all guessed dogs. And military dogs officially came into the US military in World War II. So you can see from the picture here that we have different breeds. It looks like there's a German Shepherd on the right, and then there's sort of some mutt dogs off to the left. And they had jobs like looking for mines and explosives that were a danger to the soldiers during that war. Another thing that they can do is standing guard. So you can see these dogs here with soldiers over in the Middle East, and they're helping them stand guard around probably a base or an important location for the military thing that they're trying to do. And I wonder if anyone can figure out why the dogs have goggles on. So see if you can send that into Tori and find out why they have the goggles on. Also, they can help with patrols, so going out with the soldiers and trying to find the bad guys, or making sure the bad guys aren't coming near where the soldiers are. Things like that are going to be very helpful because the dogs are much more intimidating than a human in a lot of cases. Either people are scared of the dogs, or dogs have pretty good bite if they need to use it. They can also carry messages. So if a dog is trained to go from one location to another, they can have a message strapped onto their vest or attached to them in some way and get messages through probably some rough territory so they don't put the soldiers' lives in danger. They also look for casualties. So if anybody doesn't know what a casualty is, that's when somebody's been attacked and they've passed away, and the dogs are trained to go find these people so they can be taken home so that their families can have a funeral and things like that. They also look for wounded soldiers. So like I said, sometimes in military life there's gunshots going off and it's loud and smoky and dusty depending on where you are. And sometimes it's hard to find the wounded men or women who may be screaming for help and can't get up and go get to safety. So these dogs are trained to go find these people and make sure that somebody is alerted to where they are so that they can get to a safer place.
So Chelsea,
Yes.
I would like to know if the goggles protect their eyes from things getting in it.
Yes, exactly. That is exactly right. I was thinking that we would have more of like sun protection, but yeah, especially over, you can see that's in the Middle East, the goggles protect their eyes from sand mostly because it can get in there and scratch their eyes. Good job. So there are some different breeds in the military. You probably see a lot of like German Shepherd type breeds, but they actually used to take a lot of different breeds. And then they've narrowed it down to about 5. So does anybody know what a hound breed is? And then once we get some answers, we'll go over kind of why we don't use hound breeds anymore. So some of the breeds that we do use most often are German Shepherds and Belgian Malinois. And they actually look really similar. And if you're not super familiar with looking at them, it can be kind of hard to tell them apart. So this is a Belgian Malinois on the tank that's kind of hanging out with his really cool dog collar.
Are the hound breeds hunting dogs?
Yes, exactly. So hound breeds are hunting dogs. So if you think about the hunting dogs, they're trained to sniff out things and find whatever they're looking for. So if you have these dogs that are really, really into sniffing around for things, maybe that's good to find bombs and stuff, but it might not be good if they get distracted and they say, oh, look, I found this animal running over here, that sort of thing. So that's why they don't take the hound breeds so much anymore. And sometimes they do take golden retrievers or more often like your Labrador retrievers. So those animals are often used in search and rescue. So some of the reasons that we use German Shepherds, and if any of you have seen documentaries or anything about sort of World War II, you might see where German Shepherds came from. So they came from Germany, where they were used as military dogs, and they were bred for certain traits that make them good military dogs. So some of the things are they're very intelligent. If any of you have ever had a German Shepherd, you know that they're super smart, easy to train, they're very loyal, they're really good dogs. They actually have a little bit of aggressiveness to them, which if they're trained properly and socialized well is actually a really good trait for being in the military or police type work. And then they can also adapt to different climates. So the places where things happen, you know, we can't control that. So for instance, for the wars in the Middle East, it gets really, really hot over there. So we have to have dog breeds that are able to survive and be okay in those sorts of extreme environments. So we're going to run through some pictures of dogs doing some work. So here we have a Belgian Malinois. It looks like he's out on patrol. This is like my favorite picture in the entire presentation. So we've got this guy, we've got the goggles like we talked about to protect his eyes. He's got that big vest, so he's strapped in really well. And then he's got a muzzle on, and that's to protect him and his handlers. He could get his teeth caught on stuff. Maybe he freaks out and accidentally hurts the handler. So it's just for the safety of the dog that he's got the goggles and the muzzle, and he's nice and strapped in. And it takes a lot of training to get these dogs up to this level. So it's really, really impressive. And then the other thing I wanted to point out is the soldiers that work with the dogs are responsible for caring for them. So if you look at this picture, you see that the soldier's actually trimming his nails. It's really important to keep their nails trimmed so they don't have problems with their feet. Here's our cool guy on the tank again. And then here are some dogs that have served in the military. And you can see most of these look kind of German Shepherdy. There's at least one Belgian Malinois in there. So why do you think that we choose dogs? We talked about sort of some of the traits for German Shepherds that make them really good military dogs, but why do you think dogs in general? Like why not cats or, I don't know, ferrets or something else? So let's see if we can get some answers in to Tori. And so I thought this picture was really cool. They really do treat dogs as soldiers whenever the soldiers are working with the dogs. So this picture kind of points that out. So if they get injured or anything like that, the soldiers are going to treat them like a fellow comrade who got injured and get them to safety. Do we have any answers just yet?
Dogs like people.
That's a good point, actually, yeah, and we'll go into that in just a minute. Any others so far?
So far, that's it.
All right, so let's start going through these. So one of them is their sense of smell is amazing. Everybody knows dogs can smell well, but I actually heard a story yesterday that kind of proves how awesome their sense of smell is. So there's actually a dog that's trained, or some dogs that are trained to sniff out mines that are 10 feet underground. So if you think about 10 feet, maybe your average teacher or somebody about my height is like 5.5 feet. So if you take two of me and stack me on top of myself, and then imagine that's how deep it is that the bomb or the mine is hidden, the dogs can actually sniff that out. And they're trained to go sit on top of that location, and they do not move until they are told that they can move. And that might be hours before they're able to. And that's really impressive. If you told me to sit down and stay in a place for hours, I might move. So the fact that a dog can be so well trained to do that is really amazing. And the fact that they can sniff that out is also really, really cool, and it makes them really good soldiers. So they don't just look for explosive things. They can look for soldiers who have been hit, or they can track down bad guys. And you may have seen movies where the dog sniffs a garment of clothing and then they go running off after the bad guy. So that sort of thing is actually one of the jobs that dogs can do in the military. And then they can also look for drugs. And then if there's soldiers that have passed away, they can find them. So again, they can get them home. And we wanted to go over the human-animal bond with you. So some people may not be super familiar with this concept, but like one person said, dogs like people, and people love dogs. So any of you who have dogs at home know that you can be very, very close with your friend. They're like a family member to you. And the fact that humans and animals have that strong bond and have for many, many years makes them really good companions to go out into a dangerous environment and work well together and to save each other's lives, really. And they can also be very loyal and obviously very trainable. I mean, to train a dog to sit there for hours over something that's 10 feet underground is very, very impressive to me. And one thing that's very cool, I know you guys are kind of all over the US, but I'm here in Texas, so it's really cool to me that they're trained right here in Texas, in San Antonio. And they have been since, I think, 1958. And the official name for the department that trains them is the Department of Defense Military Working Dog Program. And it's a long training process. They select dogs and they put them through very rigorous training. And if they don't make it through that training, then they're not fit to be military dogs. And they really are heroes. So here's a story of a dog named Lucca. And she was a German Shepherd, Belgian Malinois mix. And if you notice in the picture, she's missing her left front leg. So she was a bomb-sniffing dog, or a explosive sniffing dog. And she was in the military from 2006 to, I can't quite remember, but she was in the military for several years, and she did several tours of duty. If you're unfamiliar with what a tour of duty is, it's where you have a prescribed amount of time that you go out and you serve in the military, and then you get to go home after that period of time. So she went out on several of these tours of duty. She found more than 400 pounds of explosives. So if you imagine 400 pounds of stuff that blows up, that's a lot of lives she probably saved. I'm sorry, more than 400 patrols and 40 pounds of explosives. So she went out and she looked for these bombs to make sure that they didn't blow up and hurt the military men and women. And she was actually awarded an award by a veterinary company, and we have on the slide there what does IED stand for. So that's one of the things that she really went searching for, was the improved explosive or improvised explosive device, which means that it's basically a bomb that somebody made at home. So it was the Veterinary Charity's Animal Military Service Award, and you can see her wearing it around her neck there. And here she is actually before she lost her leg while she was out doing some work with the military. And it's been estimated that just in the year 2010, 150 to 1,800 lives were saved by military dogs, or per military dog rather. And so that's really impressive, and over 1,200 pounds of explosives. So you can see what a really, really big impact military dogs have on the lives of the soldiers and on the effort that the military is trying to get to overseas in general. So we talked about people in the military, and we talked about dogs in the military, but do y'all think we have some other animals? Any military cats, ferrets, things like that?
How about birds?
Birds, yeah. So while y'all are thinking about that, we're going to talk about horses. So you might think horses, well, that's like in old movies and stuff. We don't really see horses in the military. And it's true that they were used more in the past. So if you've ever heard of the cavalry, those are the soldiers that came in on the horses and they rode into battle, and it was a really good advantage for them to be on a horse. So the reasons for that would be that the horse is faster than a human, and also they're taller, so they're kind of above the bad guys and they can sort of get to them better. And also, before we had trucks and tanks that were really, really heavy duty, the horses were the main way to get things through stuff like what you see in this picture. That's a pretty mucky environment to try to get a vehicle through. Today, horses are actually still used in the military. So they're used for things like ceremonies here and abroad, and then also for training. So one of the really cool things that horses have come back into the military for is going through mountains. So you can see in this training area, this is actually in the US, but they can carry things through the mountains where even our best trucks and tanks and things aren't very good at getting through. So in the war in Afghanistan, we actually had something called the horse soldiers, which were horses that were brought in specifically for that purpose to get things through the mountains. And then also therapy for returning heroes. So Heroes and Horses is a program where some of our military heroes who went through a lot of stress while they were in the military come back to normal life. And it's kind of difficult for them to adjust back to being at home and living where you're not in danger all the time. So horses can actually be very good therapy animals to help those soldiers get rid of stress and feel better once they get home. So why horses? We talked about how they have the height and the speed advantage. If they're used in the cavalry, they can get through some of the really crummy terrain. But one other thing is that they aren't the only animal that does this sort of job. Actually, we can use things like camels, especially in the Middle East where there's a lot of sand, and those animals are really used to that. or even like mules or donkeys. Also, if we're in mountains and we're having trouble getting vehicles there, or a helicopter can't come in at the moment, the horses can be really good to help get people out of the situation, like wounded soldiers. So, like we said, mules and camels can also be used for this purpose. And these are called pack animals. So any pack animal can be used to kind of move things around and get through that kind of terrain, because that's sort of what they're built for. So my favorite story of a military horse is Sergeant Reckless. So Sergeant Reckless was a horse that was in the Korean War. And basically the soldiers in this one group were like, we need somebody to, or an animal to help us move things through this really rough terrain. Like that would really, really help us out. So they went to a local racetrack and they found, I think she was about 4 years old, and she wasn't used for racing really, but she kind of lived there. So they found this horse and they trained her to be in the military basically. So she lived with the Marines, and she was actually admitted into the Marines as an officer. And she carried supplies and ammunition through some of the rough terrain, and also some wounded soldiers. So what's really cool is they used to keep her kind of like out in a field near the camp. And then she was so friendly and so social with them that they started letting her kind of walk around the camp as she wanted. So if it was a cold night, she would go sleep in the tents with the soldiers. And if she had something that she wanted to eat that maybe she shouldn't, like Coke, they would let her have it. And she was trained for actual combat too. So she learned that incoming meant run for the bunkers, and she would learn to get down if there was firefight. And so the coolest thing was the Battle of this long word that I may not be able to pronounce, where she actually went back and forth between different locations by herself. So she made 51 trips back and forth. And she was trained on where these locations were so that she didn't have to have a human with her at all. She did this all on her own. And she carried lots and lots of ammunition and weapons for the soldiers to make sure that they didn't run out while they were in battle. And she also carried some of the wounded men back to the camp. And so she covered 35 miles that day, going back and forth on all these trips. If you can imagine covering 35 miles in one day, that's impressive right there. But the fact that she could do it by herself and that she was helping these soldiers is just so amazing to me. So Sergeant Reckless is probably the coolest war horse I've ever heard of. So what about other military animals? Do we have any responses yet?
We are having some technical difficulties actually right now. So we're kind of low on responses, but we are recording this and we'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel as soon as possible for anyone that's out there having trouble with us.
Okay. So there are some other animals that have been used in the military in the past and that are still used in the military. So the US Navy uses these mammals to look for mines. So I'll give you a second to think about that. And these animals are actually trained to not only find mines, but then hop on the boat and go find other mines. So it's dolphins. And they do use some robotics for this now, but these were actually wild dolphins that were trained to not only find the mines, but hop on the boat and then go find more in other locations. So that's pretty cool. And you can imagine that the trainers had to work pretty intensively with these animals. But they're so incredibly smart that they're able to do this. And it's a lot safer to have a dolphin go down there than to have a human go down there. So the Navy also uses some other animals to look for swimmers in the water. So if you're wondering why we'd be looking for swimmers, one of the big reasons is people will swim here from other countries and kind of sneak in, which they're not really supposed to do, or if there are people that are kind of out in the water, and those are sea lions. So sea lions love swimming around in the water, and they can apparently be trained pretty well to go do that. And then this one might surprise some people. It surprised some of my classmates. But there's a certain small mammal that's used to sniff for bombs. They wear a little vest and they stay on sort of a line so they don't get lost, but they're really good at sniffing out bombs. And those are rats. So that's pretty cool that the rats can even work for the military. And then there were some animals, we mentioned it earlier, who were used to send messages, not so much anymore, but once upon a time. So carrier pigeons. You may have heard of carrier pigeons. They had sort of a little vest strapped onto them, and they would get these little messages on them, and they learn a route where they would fly a message to someone and then fly back. So you would think that they might fly the message there and then kind of go about their business, but they were actually trained to come back. So we're going to kind of run through what we've learned today. So veterinarians work in the military in a lot of different ways. They can work on the military dogs, they can work on the military horses, they can, another thing we didn't mention is they actually do food inspection. So if you think about it, in the US we have a really safe food supply, but in other countries the food that the soldiers are eating might not be totally disease-free. So there are actually veterinarians who go in and check that the meat doesn't have things like bugs in it or parasites, and that it's healthy for the soldiers to eat. And they can also work on military men and women's animals here at home, and then they can do sort of combat work, and they can do research, all kinds of stuff to help out our military efforts. They also have their four-legged soldiers that work with them. So we talked about dogs and their good sense of smell. They're very loyal, trainable. That dog, Lucca, she actually had her handler who worked with her in the beginning of her career ended up adopting her when she retired from the military. And that was the gentleman you saw in the picture shaking her one front leg. And then the other thing we learned were some breeds of dogs. So we don't really use hound dogs because they might get a little distracted, whereas dogs like German Shepherds or Belgian Malinois are very trainable, very focused, and very loyal to work with for military purposes. Also, horses were used in the military in the past, such as Sergeant Reckless. They were used in the cavalry a lot before we had really good tanks and vehicles to go into war. And they were also used in the Afghan war more recently. And then there are other animals that kind of help out in smaller ways, not necessarily in battle, but the special skills that animals have can really, really help us out, and they can be our heroes, where it might be dangerous for a human to go in, and they're willing to go in and do the dangerous work and help out the humans and the whole military effort. So military animals deserve fireworks and praise on Veterans Day as well. So we'll see if we have any questions.
We do have some questions, Chelsea. We have some students who would like to know how the animals are trained. And I know this could be a whole nother talk about animal behavior, but if you could give us just a rundown on how they use some of their natural behaviors and how they use some of their learned behaviors to train them to do all the different things that they do.
Okay, yeah, so a lot of it's very reward-based. So for instance, the search and rescue dogs, one of the things that they'll do is they have like a favorite toy or some sort of treat that a person is holding, and the dog wants to go find that thing in all the rubble or in the mess that they're trying to search for a human in. And so when they find the person has that thing that they want, so it's rewarding to the dog to go find the person. Also, it's very important that these dogs are trained so that they're not scared of like loud noises. You can imagine having a dog that goes through all this training to be good at sniffing out a bomb or finding people who have been wounded, and then a shot is fired and he freaks out and runs for cover. That wouldn't really work. So they have to really get these dogs used to all kinds of different things in their training and just positively reinforce what they're learning. And so you may have seen kind of the guys in the big what are they called?
Padded.
The big padded suits, yeah, where the dogs go and they're taught to attack and then release on command. So they get to practice those things on the big padded suits where they're not going to hurt anybody. And that way, if they do need to go get a bad guy, when they're out in the military, the soldier can say, hey, go get him. And then when they're done, they can bring them back. So having things like good reinforcement, starting at a really young age, spending a lot of time with them, and the military handlers working with them very closely helps to make them good military dogs and really, really well trained. And some dogs are innately better at things than other dogs, so they might be born really good at sniffing out a bomb versus being a good patrol dog, and they look for those strengths and weaknesses to make sure that the dog goes into the right job.
So this kind of goes along with that same line of training these animals. They'd like to know, do you have to be a veterinarian to train these animals?
So no, actually, as far as I know, most of the people who train them are not veterinarians. They're actually trainers or behaviorists who understand what the military dogs need to accomplish and what kind of training they need to do that. And there's a lot of history going into it because they've been in the military since World War II. They've kind of figured out what works and what doesn't work for training dogs to make sure they can do the job as best as possible. So the people who work in that training are very knowledgeable about that sort of thing. So it's not necessarily going to be a veterinarian who does that.
And what kind of education do you need to become an animal trainer?
Oh, see, that's a big question. There are actually a lot of different types of animal trainers. So there's everything from going to a school for a couple of months and learning about, teaching sit and stay, to veterinary behaviorists who go to college and then vet school, and then they get an extra certification in behavior. So there's kind of a wide range depending on what sort of training you want to get into.
All right, great. So we have another question here that once the students would like to know, where do these animals come from that join the military? Where do they get them? Are they bred by the military? Do they come from outside sources? Do you know?
So a lot of them are actually bred by the military because, once they have these lines of dogs that do really well in a military setting, they want to keep that sort of line going. I believe when I was reading up on it that some of the dogs actually do come from outside places, but I think most of them are bred by the military.
Is that true with the other animals, the horses, the rats?
I couldn't tell you about those.
No problem. And then where do the animals go when they retire?
So I know that the dogs go into an adoption program when they retire. If anybody has seen the movie Max about the military dog, it kind of talks about that a bit. It's kind of a cute movie. I think it's rated PG. So they go into retirement and then they get adopted by people. So a lot of times the military handlers, if they're not still overseas, will adopt the dogs, or they just go to regular families. And something that's kind of interesting is just like soldiers can be really stressed out when they come back from military life. So can the dogs. So they really need a loving home to care for them and make them feel safe and be able to give them a happy, healthy life.
All right, and what do the animals do, the horses, dogs, any of them, when they come home? Do they just lead a regular life with a family, or do they still have a job?
Yeah, so most of them, if they get adopted to a family, they become a family pet. I didn't read about any specific instances of them working in like police work or anything, but I would imagine that some of them might.
That's great. Okay. How do animals help the soldiers when they come home? I think we mentioned it briefly. Yeah. Can you go into more detail about how animals help soldiers beyond the battlefield?
Yeah, so the horses and heroes, there are other therapy animals, but that was a specific program that I read up on. So if you've ever heard of sort of therapy horses, one of the things that they do is they're these big sort of gentle animals when they're trained well, and it's very calming to pet a horse, ride a horse, work with an animal that's very relaxed and gentle like that, and that's just a very calming effect on the soldier when they get home and they're kind of still stressed out. And so there are dogs that can do that aren't necessarily military dogs, but they're therapy dogs or even therapy cats. And then there's a specific program with horses, so the soldiers can learn to ride the horses, take care of them, sort of interact with them. And it's just a very calming environment. If you've ever been out with a horse in a pasture and kind of brushed him out and stuff, it can be really fun and just relaxing.
All right. So what happens to the animals that don't make the cut? If they can't be trained, they're afraid of the loud noises, any of those problems, what happens to them?
So those animals get adopted out to homes as well. They sort of the military rejects, I guess, but they're usually pretty good dogs, and so they find homes as well.
And who can be a trainer for some of these animals? The service animals, I think is what they mean. Who can be the trainer for the animals that serve the soldiers after they've come back from battle?
So the trainers that work with them before they go to battle are going to be in the military. I know with like the dolphins, there was actually just a veterinary behaviorist who was very good with sea mammals, and she worked in like a zoo type place training the dolphins, and then went on to work for the military to do that because she was such an expert in the field. I think most of the military trainers are trained with the military itself.
Yeah, even the service dogs after the fact?
I don't know how much training they really do after the fact.
After the fact,
yeah.
Okay. All right. So I think those are all the questions that I have right now about the military animals. We have some questions about you, if you could tell us about what you're studying and how you get into vet school, things of that nature. If you want to, there are a variety of questions in that vein, if you want to kind of give them a rundown of what it's like.
Okay, so yeah, I went to school like you all are. I was actually homeschooled for middle and high school, and then I went to a junior college for a year before I went to A&M. And so I got my bachelor's degree in biology at Texas A&M after 1 year at the community college and 3 years there. I then went to go work for a veterinarian and kind of just learn if this is something I really want to do and kind of how it works. I actually worked for a veterinarian in a shelter for a while, and she didn't have a lot of testing ability at the shelter. They just didn't have a lot of equipment. But she would look at an animal and say, okay, its gums are kind of pale, so it might be anemic, so maybe it has this, that, or the other going on with it. And then she would prescribe medications based on what she saw and what she had learned in school. And even without all the fancy testing, she was able to take these really sick little animals and get them so healthy. And I was like, I want to be able to do that. So that's what really got me into it. And then once I got through A&M as an undergraduate and got my degree in biology, I applied to vet school. I want to work on cats, dogs, and sort of the small furry animals like ferrets and rats and things like that. And I want to work kind of like a small animal practice, so like a 9-to-5 sort of thing. And vet school's been a lot of fun. I get to do so many cool things. I've done surgeries and all this kind of stuff that you think as a kid, or at least I did when I was 11, like it would be really neat to be able to do that. That's so awesome, and I'm actually doing it, and it's just really, really rewarding.
So advice to these young people out there who think they would like to do what you're doing, what should they be doing to prepare?
So kind of depending on how old you are, getting good animal experience is really, really important. So when I was in high school and even in college, whenever I had a break for the winter or the summer, I would go and volunteer at a shelter or help out my friends with their animals. So like I had a friend who had a bunny, so I learned a little bit about bunnies from her before I ever got to vet school. Just getting that good animal experience. There are also like camps that you can do. I know some zoos run like summer camps and stuff. And volunteering. So like I said, I volunteered at a shelter a lot. I walked dogs, I cleaned, I helped the veterinarian. I did kind of everything just to learn more about animals and kind of their behavior and how they work and things like that. And then if you really want to go to vet school, it's really important to get shadowing experience. So that's where you go to a vet clinic and you kind of just follow them around like a shadow and see what they do day to day. So if you want to be a veterinarian, that's something that's really important, because maybe you go and you follow them around and you're like, ugh, this is not for me. So you want to make sure it's something you really want to do before you go to vet school, because it's really tough and it's not going to be worth it to you if it's not something you really love.
Thank you. So, a fun one, what pets do you have?
I love talking about my pets. So I have 3 cats. I have a 14-year-old old lady kitty that loves to cuddle. Like really, I sit down or I stop moving and she's on top of me. And then I have 2 younger cats that I adopted from the shelter, and they are brother and sister. And they had sort of an interesting start to life. So they got kind of tangled up when they were born, and one of them lost his foot. So his name is Stumpy. But they get along really well and keep each other company, and they all know tricks. I like training my pets, so they all know sit, and some of them can do like high five, and one of them can like run to his little kitty tree if I tell him, go to your tree. So it's really fun, and I love them a lot.
So how do you train cats? The big question now. You have 3 cats that are trained. They've got to know.
So training cats is exactly the same as training dogs. You can lure them into doing things, and there's some really cool cat training videos online if you want to learn more, because I can't really tell you in a few minutes, but lots of rewards, lots of treats. So my cats eat meals, so they don't like have food out all the time. So when they get treats, they're like, oh yay, food. And they will, as long as they can figure out what I want them to do, are very excited. So like my kitty that does high five, she likes to put her paw on me when she wants something. So I taught her to go from doing that to doing this, just kind of gradually doing it. And sit is really easy. You kind of like hold it up over their head and they sort of look up and sit their butt down, and then you've got to sit and you go, yes, good cat, or use a clicker and give them the reward. So it's really like training a dog.
And kind of that same thing, and back to our presentation, they would like to know, can we train our own pets to do some of the things that the military animals do?
So you might have a pet at home that has some hidden talents, but I think the military training, especially for the dogs, is so intensive, and it starts at a really young age. So I don't know if you'd be able to train them to like go find a mine that's 10 feet underground, but you can probably train them to do some pretty cool stuff, like more than you would believe. So I encourage you to try doing that kind of thing and look up training videos and things online. And remember, when you're training, it's always about positive reinforcement. So you did a good thing, I'll give you a treat sort of training.
Great. All right. Well, I think that's about all the time we have for today. If you would like to learn more about STEM or veterinary science, we encourage you to visit our website. It's peer.tamu.edu. You can find all kinds of curriculum, classroom activities, videos, and more there, and we encourage you to visit. And we look forward to seeing you on Monday, where we will have Dr. Stickney present modern careers in veterinary science. Again, thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time.